So the thing is, my view on this is if you implement your philosophy on how to be in the world, you become less susceptible to ideological possession, which is...
Well, that's the hope.
Yeah, which is kind of the meta importance of that part of your work, I think. As I told you, I've watched most of your lectures, and I've tried to distill it back to 5 points, which in my view are the 5 strongest points. I will list them now in summary, and then we'll unpack them more.
Yeah, well, you nailed one of them right away. It's like, I mean, I have my conscious goal since learning what I've learned, which I would say occurred back in the mid to late 80s, you know, when I learned the basic principles that I've been elaborating upon over the last 30 years or so. Once I learned those, then the hope was that sharing that knowledge would make people immune to ideological possession. Yeah. That was the goal,
I think this is one of your closing remarks in Maps of Meaning. You say that the problem to society's ills is the integrity of the individual. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to list the 5 points.
Fine.
Yeah. So, point 1, the absolute centrality of the archetypical hero's myth. Point 2, your main instrument during this hero's narrative is the logos. Point 3, the way to be in the world is to orient yourself towards the highest possible good you can conceive of, because it's not as if you have anything better to do. 4, make the right sacrifices to walk with God. And in this sentence, the concept of God as a judgmental father is an articulation of the discovery of being able to bargain with the future. And 5, minimize your persona, cultivate your essence, and live in its closest possible proximity.
No, that's, you know,
I think these
for a distillation into 5, that's pretty good.
Yeah. So, first, let's start with the first point, the centrality of the archetypical hero's myth. What is the archetypical hero's myth? What makes it archetypical? And what is a hero? Could you elaborate on this?
Well, imagine that you have a problem, and then imagine that you want a solution. And imagine that there's a particular solution to that particular problem. But then imagine that you have what you might describe as a bigger problem, and that's not the problem. It's the fact that you have problems, because that's the real problem. The real problem is the fact that you have problems. And then you might say, well, you don't want a solution to a problem. You want a solution to the fact that you have problems. And so it's a leap of abstraction, right? So then you might say, well, is there a way of conceptualizing the set of all problems that's universal? And I think there is. I mean, that's what religious stories try to do. And they do it using dramatic means, because the problem is so complex, so that's the meta problem. It's so complex that we don't really know how to formulate it. But that's what we're struggling towards. So it's like, well, what's the problem of life? Something like that. Well, you could say that the problem of life, and I outlined this quite carefully in 12 Rules for Life. The problem of life is this. We're finite and mortal. That's problem number 1. So the first problem is that life is essentially tragic. It's little us against infinity, and we lose. And not only do we lose, but we lose in a manner that produces a substantial amount of suffering, and sometimes an unbearable amount. So it's a big problem. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that that's not the worst problem. The worst problem is that that's true, plus malevolence exists in the world, evil exists in the world, and makes that first problem even worse than it would have to be. And that's universally true for everyone all the time. That's archetypal. So when you formulate a situation archetypally, you speak about it in a manner that's eternally true. So there's lots of ways that you and I differ, but there's many ways that we're the same. And so that would be what constitutes our essential humanity, let's say. And what makes us the same is that, like you, I'm mortal, and my life is finite, and my existence is characterized by suffering, and I have to contend with the fact of malevolence in the world. And it's the terribly destructive character of the natural world, it's the tyrannical element of the social world, and it's the adversarial element of myself and every other individual. So that's the malevolent element. And so we're stuck with that. Okay, fine. That's the archetypal formulation of the problem. You could say that's the mythic landscape. right? And it's something like good and evil in a world of chaos and order. It's something like that.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. You know, there are games online that have that as their basic structure, right? The game developers have figured this out. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, so then the question is, well, how do you comport yourself in a landscape of chaos and order, and when the game is good versus evil, something like that? Well, then that's where the idea of the archetypal hero emerges. And the archetypal hero is the person whose eyes are open and whose speech is true, and who faces both the chaos of the unknown and the tyranny of the known and balances them, right? And then you think, well, and that's the antidote to the problem. That's the meta solution to the meta problem. And it's something like in a more straightforward form, and this is something that I spoke about because I was speaking in Holland here in the Netherlands 2 nights ago about European and Dutch identity and how to solve, let's say, the conundrums that are associated with a multicultural world and immigration. And my suggestion was, well, it's a very complex problem. There isn't a solution. But the solution to a very complex problem is you should be a better person than you are, because then you'd be better at solving complex problems. And lots of them are coming your way. So bloody well get your act together. And that's what I've been telling people. And but more than that, because it's more than that, because that's merely burdening people with excess responsibility, let's say, so that can be a crushing message. You're not who you could be. You know, get your bloody act together. You're whining away in the corner and you're no good to yourself and anyone else. You know, it's harsh. But then there's another element to that, which is there's way more to you than you think you are, and that you have something necessary and vital to contribute to the world. And if you don't contribute it, that things will happen that aren't good, and that's terrible for you and everyone else. So it's not only that you need to do this because it's your responsibility, but you need to understand that there isn't anything better that you could do for yourself or for anyone else. Yeah. And people are dying to hear that message.
Yeah.
So
that resonates with young men.
Yeah, well, it's so amazing. Like I'm in this very weird situation right now, to say the least. It's surreal. My life has been surreal for a long time. It's like being in a deli painting. You know, I continually can't believe it. And I mean continually, you know.
Does it feel that psychedelic to you?
Oh yeah, it's completely, well, it's so strange, you know, like when I got to England, for example, to London, my wife and I were staying at this little Airbnb, and we went out to get some groceries, and so I walked into the grocery store. We're only out for about an hour, and somebody recognized me in the grocery store and came up and said, look, you know, I was in a kind of desperate situation, and I was feeling pretty nihilistic and depressed, and I really wasn't paying attention to my life, and I was watching your videos, and like, thank you, it's really helped me straighten myself out. It's like, oh hell, you know, hey, great. And so then I went into the electronics store next door, and some guy came up to me and he said exactly the same thing. And so like wherever I go now, people come up to me, so they're just, I wouldn't call them random strangers, but you know what I mean. Like they are, and they say, they have their own personal take on it, you know, because they usually tell me in which particular way they were feeling nihilistic and vengeful and saddened and unable to pull themselves together. But it's the same thing. And then, you know, when I did this talk, I did 3 talks in London, and you know, we started with one theater of 300 people, which was, you know, Penguin UK was hoping that we'd do a credible job and sell some tickets, and I could talk to about the book, and it sold out instantly. Yeah, and then it said that they told me that it sold out faster than any event they'd ever hosted. And it's like, so they put up another one with 1,000 people, and it sold out right away. And then they put up another one with 1,000 people, and it sold out right away. And so then I went and talked to these, you know, at these venues, and people are overwhelmingly welcoming. It's crazy. And then afterwards, you know, like 500 people line up, and they all say the same thing. I've been watching your videos. It's like really helped me out. Yeah. It's like, how could you not feel that your life was surreal when that's happening?
Yeah, I can imagine.